Good Sunday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for February the 5th. Today we are reading together in Genesis chapter 42 as we're looking at the next progression in the story of Jacob's sons. We've seen so far what has happened to Joseph, that he's been sold into slavery. While he's gone, Judah goes on through a journey of maturation himself, making some mistakes along the way. Joseph, while in Egypt, goes through a number of ordeals himself, but ends up making his way from the jail cell up into the penthouse of Pharaoh's palace. And now we're going to see how these two roads that seem as if they've been diverging from one another are going to come back together. Joseph's brothers and then Joseph himself. We're going to see that here in chapter 42. And again, what has brought all this about is the fact that there is a famine, a famine that Joseph himself had predicted was going to take place based upon the dream that had been had by Pharaoh, the dream that he had interpreted by the power of God. And now, because of that famine, we're going to see that the brothers and the family are going to need food, and they are going to reach out to Egypt, to go down to Egypt in order to find the food and the sustenance that they need in order to survive. So let me get the text of Genesis 42 up on the screen for us. And we'll get to reading here in Genesis chapter 42. Genesis chapter 42, verse number 1. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you keep looking at each other? Listen," he went on, "I have heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we will live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he thought something might happen to him. The sons of Israel were among those who came to buy grain, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Joseph was in charge of the country. He sold grain to all its people. His brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the ground. When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke harshly to them. "Where did you come from?" he asked. "From the land of Canaan to buy food," they replied. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Joseph remembered his dreams about them and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see the weakness or the nakedness of the land." "No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food," they said. "We are all sons of one man. We are honest. Your servants are not spies." "No," he said to them, "you have come to see the weakness of the land." But they replied, "We, your servants, were 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no longer living." Then Joseph said to them, "I have spoken. You are spies, and this is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one from among you to get your brother. The rest of you will be imprisoned, so that your words can be tested to see if they are true. If they are not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies." So Joseph imprisoned them together for 3 days. On the third day, Joseph said to them, "I fear God. Do this, and you will live. If you are honest, let one of you be confined to the guardhouse, while the rest of you go and take grain to relieve the hunger of your households. Bring your youngest brother to me, so that your words can be confirmed. Then you won't die." And they consented to this. Then they said to each other, "Obviously, we are being punished for what we did to our brother. We saw his deep distress when he pleaded with us, but we would not listen. This is why this trouble has come to us." But Reuben replied, "Didn't I tell you not to harm the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must account for his blood." They did not recognize that Joseph understood them, since there was an interpreter between them. He turned away from them and wept. When he had turned back and spoke to them, he took Simeon from them and had him bound before their eyes. Joseph then gave orders to fill their containers with grain, return each man silver to his sack, and give them provisions for their journey. This order was carried out, and they loaded the grain on their donkeys and left there. At the place where they lodged for the night, one of them opened his sack to feed his donkey, and he saw his silver there at the top of his bag. He said to his brothers, "My silver has been returned. It's here in my bag." And their hearts sank. Trembling, They turned to one another and said, "What has God done to us?" When they reached their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them. The man who was the lord of the country spoke harshly to us and accused us of spying on the country. But we told him, "We are honest and not spies. We were 12 brothers sent of the same father. One is no longer living, and the youngest is now with our father in the land of Canaan." The man who is the lord of the country said to us, "This is how I will know if you are honest. Leave one brother with me, take food to relieve the hunger of your households, and go. Bring back your youngest brother to me, and I will know that you are not spies, but honest men. I will then give your brother back to you, and you can trade in the country." As they began emptying their sacks, there in each man's sack was a bag of silver. When they and their father saw their bags of silver, they were afraid. Their father Jacob said to them, "It's me that you make childless. Joseph is gone, and Simeon is gone. Now you want to take Benjamin? Everything happens to me." Then Reuben said to his father, "You can kill my 2 sons if I don't bring him back to you. But put him in my care, and I will return him to you." But Jacob answered, "My son will not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he alone is left. If anything happens to him on your journey, you will bring gray hairs down to Sheol you will bring my gray hairs down to Sheol in sorrow." Genesis chapter 42. Remember in the previous chapter, as I mentioned, that Joseph has been put in charge of taking care of the issues surrounding this famine, the distribution of food and such. God, of course, is the one who made that possible and who put them in this position so that he might be in this position as his brothers come to gain food. As the chapter begins, it's almost as if the brothers are kind of just standing around and looking at each other, wondering, well, what exactly are we going to do? How are we going to feed ourselves? Yet it's Jacob showing himself still being the patriarch, still being even in his old age, the leader of his family. He's the one who figures out the solution. He says, "Listen, I have heard that there is food down in Egypt. So we're going to go down there and we're going to get food, or at least you're going to go down there and get food so we don't die. This is truly a matter of life and death." They needed to do this in order to continue on. The text tells us that 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy this food. Benjamin does not go. We're going to see later on a little bit of why. Later on, Jacob's going to speak to the importance of Benjamin. But maybe here in the moment, he doesn't trust the brothers to take care of his new favorite son, who's replaced Joseph probably as the favorite son. Maybe this is just natural parental concern. Maybe it's a bit of paranoia on his part. Whatever the case is, 10 go, 1 stays, and in Jacob's mind, 1 is already gone. Well, the sons of Israel, they find themselves going down to Egypt. They get in a position where they can buy some grain. Joseph, again, is in charge of this whole production, the whole grain selling process. He probably isn't making all of the transactions himself, but maybe the big ones, or maybe the ones concerning people from out of Egypt, are ones that he concerns himself with. Be that as it may, his brothers come and bow down to him, which begins to fulfill the dreams that we remember Joseph having previously, where his sheaf was bowed down before the other brothers. Their sheaves bow down before Joseph and his sheaf of grain. So we see that Joseph recognizes his brothers. They don't recognize him. Of course, they wouldn't recognize him. He's 13 years older. He's a man now. He looks like a man, but he looks like an Egyptian man. Again, would have been much less hairy than them, not as much hair on the head or hair on the face. He would have more than likely, if what we know about the ancient Egyptian culture, would have had some sort of makeup on. He would have had Egyptian clothes on. We're going to see that he is speaking the Egyptian language. So it makes a lot of sense they would not have recognized him. And why would they recognize him? Why would they ever think that their brother who they sold would now be second in command in Egypt? That even if they thought that he kind of sort of looked like Joseph, there's no reason for them to think that that would have been him anyways. So they begin to communicate, and the text tells us that Joseph speaks harshly to them. Why? Why does he do this? The narrator, the author of Genesis, doesn't tell us why he does this. So the interpretation of his actions is left open-ended, and we really just can take the data and draw a conclusion for ourselves. Some think that Joseph is simply testing the brothers to try to see if there is a penitent heart within them for what they have done. Or some people think that Joseph is just being vengeful, that he is going to seek retribution for what they have done to him. Think about the last thing that we see Joseph saying about his family, how he's thankful to God that he has forgotten his family and forgotten his land. Probably would see him as honestly being more vengeful. He's upset with them, and he's not going to be extremely nice to them. Although I would say that as the story progresses, and especially as he does see what seems to be some penitence in their heart, that he begins to change and soften, and eventually does, show kindness to them in many ways. But initially, he's very harsh to them, accuses them of being spies. They say, no, we're not spies. It's really funny is whenever they say, we are honest. Are they honest? Not exactly. At least they haven't been in their previous dealings with Joseph. So there's a bit of irony there in that moment. But it does make sense, since they would not be spies. You wouldn't send an entire family, just brothers, to be spies. That doesn't make that much sense. You might break them up into different groups. That way they're not all caught at once, maybe, and a whole family is wiped out, having been caught as spies. They say, we just come to gain food for our family. Joseph doubles down. No, you've come to see the weakness and the nakedness of the land. Again, they say in verse 13, no, we're 12 brothers. Now they give a whole lot of information. We were 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no longer living. So he gets the information that he might have been fishing for here, learning that his father's still alive, Benjamin's still alive, and they think that Joseph, the one they're speaking to, although they don't know it, they think that he is dead. Joseph triples down. No, you are spies, and this is how you're going to be tested. You're all going to stay here. One's going to go back. You're going to get that younger son so I can validate your story. Then he can come back, and we'll go from there. He ends up throwing them in prison for 3 days. Really makes them sweat this out. Really makes them think that he is serious about this accusation, about this threat. Well, on the third day, the text says in verse number 18, Joseph speaks to them again and says, I fear God. And notice he says, I fear God. I fear Elohim. I fear, again, a being of the supernatural kind. He doesn't say, I fear Yahweh. I think that probably would have given him away a lot more. But simply him saying, I fear God, he knows what he means by that. But they don't necessarily know what he means by that. So they might think that he's just referring to some god of the Egyptians. But he says, that plans have changed. No longer is he going to keep all and send one. Now he's going to keep one and send the rest of them back. Maybe the way he would validate this is saying, well, one person can't take back enough food to feed all of your family. So he's going to end up keeping one of them and sending back the other ones. And when he says this, tells them the plan, then he says at this point, or they say, he says, you have to come back, bring the youngest son, so everything could be confirmed. Well, then they begin to freak out a little bit, because again, Benjamin's the new favorite. Benjamin wasn't allowed to come originally. There's no way they're going to get him come back again. And they begin panicking, and they begin really spilling their guilty consciences before Joseph, without them knowing that he understands. Of course, he's been speaking to them with the translator, the text tells us. But they say, obviously, we are being punished for what we did to our brother, what we did to Joseph. We saw his distress. We didn't care. We sold him. Now it's coming back upon us. We've sowed this world, we've sowed to the wind in this way. And now we're going to reap the whirlwinds. Reuben stands up, who should be the leader as the oldest, but he stands up and he says, basically, I told you so. I told you we shouldn't have done this. This isn't my fault. Now I'm getting caught up in this, even though I told you this isn't what we should have done. Joseph understood them. He sees them confessing to what they've done, recognizing the wrong that they have done. Again, they don't know this because there's a translator. He's been speaking to them in the Egyptian language. Now they're speaking in Hebrew, and they understand, or they're speaking, and he understands, even though they don't know he understands. He has to turn away. He weeps because he's saddened by this. And he turns back and speaks to them again, and he sets up a test for them. The test is, not only does he give them the grain, excuse me, not only does he give them the grain, but he also returns the silver that they would have paid for the food. He returns that back to them as well. Then he sends them on their way. Again, many different understandings of what this means. Why did he do this? Some would say that he's testing the value of life over money, because previously, in regard to Joseph, they gave his life in return for money. Well, now they're seeing if they're willing to come back and give money in return for Simeon. So they take off on their way. After this, whenever they stop, one of them opens up his sack and sees the money there. They start freaking out. And again, in the end of verse 28, what is this that God has done to us? I believe they're coming to the conclusion that this is some sort of divine punishment that is coming upon them for what they have done. Well, in verse number 29, they get back to Jacob and they begin telling him what has happened. The text says that they told him all that had happened to them. Sorta, they leave out a few different details, but that's not uncommon for them leaving out specific details. And after they say all this, they all return to their sacks now to empty out their sacks from the journey, and they each see that there's silver in their sacks. And when they see this, and when Jacob sees this, they all become afraid. Jacob says to them, "It's me that you make childless. Joseph is gone. Simeon is gone," which he's not exactly gone. They know where he is, but maybe Jacob at this point doesn't have any intention of going and getting him back. And he says, "And now you want to take Benjamin away from me. Everything just happens to me. I feel snake bitten." Again, it's interesting that he says that, considering he is someone in the past who has been very deceitful, and now he's kind of caught up in a web of deceitfulness and lies. But Reuben steps up, and it seems as if he really wants to be that leader, although he's really messed that up with what he did with Bilhah. He's going to end up being cursed later on for that. But he says, Dad, we're going to go back, and if we don't get him back, then you can kill my two sons. Which, how exactly is that going to help Jacob? Is it really going to make him feel better that Joseph's dead and Simeon's dead and Benjamin's dead and now two of his grandsons are dead? That's not going to make him feel better. Reuben's just spitting off and saying things that don't make any sense. Again, he's trying to be this leader, but he really just falls short of living up to the leadership type of mentality and mindset. And Jacob says, my son, as opposed to y'all, my son will not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he alone is left. He just really draws what seems to be a very big distinction between Joseph and Benjamin and the rest of the sons. And he says, if anything happens to him on your journey, not if anything happens to y'all, but if anything happens to him specifically, you will bring my gray hairs down to Sheol in sorrow. So at this point within the story, there is this open-ended, unresolved issue concerning Simeon. What's going to happen with Simeon? Are they going to get Simeon back? Are they even going to go back down to Egypt again? Because they've already gotten the food that they needed originally in order to survive. So what's going to happen at this point? What's going to happen with the brothers of Joseph? What's going to happen with Jacob and his sons? Are they going to have a resolution? Are they all going to be brought back together? Or what's the deal? We'll continue to see that as we make our way through this story. I was thinking about Joseph and his kind of the way he behaves within this narrative. Again, it's easy to kind of whitewash the story and see Joseph in an entirely just positive light. But that approach, I think, misses the real human reaction to difficulty that Joseph was experiencing. Remember, the last thing we saw with Joseph was him naming his son Manasseh because he was thankful that God had helped him forget his father and forget his homeland and forget everything about that part of his life. Well, now his brothers show up and he's reminded of all that again. He's reminded of his dreams. He's reminded of the hurt. He's reminded of the betrayal, everything that's happened to him. Is it really beyond reasonable doubt that he would initially maybe be upset and vengeful? I don't doubt that one bit. I can completely see how he might have began to think and treat them in that way. But again, we still know the integrity of Joseph, that he does seem to really care for Yahweh and being faithful to him. So maybe after that initial harshness, he begins to think, no, I'm better than this. I'm not going to stoop down to their level and treat them the way they treated me. So he does devise this plan in which he is going to see whether or not they have truly changed and to see what type of people they are at this point. So I just encourage you to do your best to not try to fit these various characters of the story into the box that maybe we want them to be. We want to see Joseph as this all-American great guy who doesn't make any mistakes. I mean, who in scripture really fits that mold at all? Very few. Jesus alone perfectly. But even those who are described as blameless and such, they had low moments, difficulties in their faith as well. So let's be willing to see that from the standpoint of Joseph, being willing to see where he might have allowed his negative emotions to initially direct how he treated them, but how he began to rethink that and then behave the way that we would expect for the faithful man of Joseph to behave. So let's just take that in consideration, consider that for ourselves. Have we ever been in a position where maybe we're in a situation where initially we didn't respond very well, but we kind of righted that ship and got ourselves back to where we needed to be? I think that's kind of where Joseph is here. So that can encourage us then, maybe in situations where we don't initially respond well. It doesn't mean we have to continue that improper response. We can change and take a step back, refocus ourselves, change our mindset, change our attitude, and then approach that same situation in a better way. I think that's what Joseph does here. And maybe part of that has to do with the fact that he is seeing some softness of heart from his brothers, and that moves him even more so to show kindness to them, and not only sending them back with food, but also sending them back with the silver. Maybe it was a test as well, but all this is going to work out not only for the good of the family, but as Joseph is going to say eventually in chapter 50, this is exactly what God wanted. He wanted to preserve us. He wanted to preserve this family, and that's exactly what he has accomplished through you sending me down here and through me being able to do what I was able to do with this nation of Egypt, and then providing for you through them as well. I appreciate you tuning in to this read on this Sunday. I hope you have a great rest of your Sunday, especially as we get ready to gather together for our Bible studies at 10 a.m. and our worship assembly at 11 a.m. I'm excited to present our second study in our year-long series of understanding who we are in Christ. And we're going to be studying today from Ephesians chapter 2, where we're going to consider the fact that we are saved by grace through faith. Saved by grace through faith. To just look at the text, to really investigate what the text has to say to us and understand that incredible truth of how we are saved and the amazing grace of God that is seen in that, and the power that he provides to save us, even though we are very much unworthy of such. I'm really excited to study that with you today from Ephesians chapter 2. Looking forward to that, and hope you have a great rest of your Sunday. Take care, and God bless.